Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream today. It is 6 p.m. UK time and very different, time frame thing we're doing here, a few hours later than usual. But we are a go. If you can see and hear me, give me a thumbs up. Let me know where you're watching from. We've got, who have we got already? Scott, not Scott Dikkers, but another Scott. Scott Hollingsworth is here. Teddy from Texas. Code Whisperer from Texas. Michelle from Toronto. Mary from Minnesota. Who else have we got? Beth from Pennsylvania. Winona is here. Bo is here. Rick is here from Tallahassee. Wendy from South Manchester. That is my neck of the woods. Pooh from London. Jason gives me a thumbs up. Wonderful. Bob from Las Vegas. David from Charlotte. Mark from Montana. Mike from Canada. And everything looking good. Wonderful. Well, it is a pleasure to be here today. And we do have a special guest. This is a wonderful guest we have today that I've been wanting to have on a live stream for a while. So I'm not going to linger. I'm just going to bring up my screen quickly and just give a brief intro before we dive in. So today we are joined by Scott Dikkers. Scott is the founder of theonion.com. And he's done lots of other stuff as well, which we'll get into. But if it's your first time here, just a little welcome and explain what we're doing. If you can give me a like and subscribe, that would be awesome. Slave to the algorithm. We do have an open policy on questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments. I'll keep an eye on the comments. I will pick questions that are, interesting and relevant and ask Scott to give an answer to them as we go. So feel free to just ask away in the comments. As you can see up above, right up there, we have a link, michaelessek.com/Scott. If you're interested in checking out some of Scott's products, he has a few courses that we've got links to there. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get going here as well today. So that's the plan. Today, I will give a brief intro. I'll let Scott kind of introduce himself, but I'll tell you why I've brought him on here today and why I wanted to talk to him. So a few years ago, when I was, I've been running my T-shirt business, primarily making a living from funny T-shirt designs for a few years. And I decided, maybe I should try and learn a bit more about the theory of comedy and what makes things funny. And I went through a little, I guess you call it splurge. And I just kind of bought every book I could find about comedy writing, about what makes something funny, about how to write jokes and stuff like that. Because I thought if I learned this stuff, it would make me a better designer. I'd come up with better ideas. And I was disappointed with a lot of what I read. A lot of stuff was just kind of lists of jokes or just rehashes of really basic stuff. And Scott was one of the few who'd written a book about comedy and writing comedy that was actually very practical and helpful. So ever since then, I've thought this would be a great guy to talk to and bring on and to have a discussion with. So that's why he's here today. So please give a warm welcome virtually. You can clap wherever you are to Scott Dikkers as I bring him on here now. So welcome aboard, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Now, whereabouts are you based right now, Scott?
I'm presently in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Minneapolis, very nice. And what's the weather like right there?
You know what? I haven't been outside today, but it's summer. We're in the Mississippi Delta, so it's probably humid and 90.
Sounds better than here anyway.
Yeah, but I live in a hermetically sealed apartment, and I never go outside. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, we've had a heat wave here the past few weeks, and we don't have air conditioning in the UK. So I've had every window open. I've had to buy a fan. I've had to try and do everything I can to keep cool.
Why don't they have air conditioning in the UK? What's that about?
Well, it's just not really hot enough. It's hot for
they don't need it. I
2 or 3, 4 weeks of the year or something like that. But when it hits, it really is a bit uncomfortable to say the least. So Scott. I've given obviously a very brief intro, but why don't you tell us a bit about your background, how you got started in the comedy business,
sure,
and maybe a little bit about The Onion, which is obviously the thing you're probably best known for.
Yeah, it certainly is. So the funny thing about The Onion, so it was founded. The Onion started as a newspaper and was founded in the late '80s, and I was actually a professional comedy person before The Onion ever got started. I was I think the only person involved in starting up the Onion who had any professional comedy experience. So that was one of the reasons why the two guys who founded it wanted me involved. I had a comic strip that was really popular, and I produced T-shirts with my comic characters on them and made a really good living selling T-shirts through a local store, and then she would sell them to other stores. And I really got to know the T-shirt business. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of it was the most lucrative vertical of all my comic strip work. The comic strip itself made a little money being self-syndicated to a bunch of different newspapers. I put out a book, a collection of the strip. That did really well. But they all paled in comparison to the T-shirts. It was like hundreds, thousands a month, and the T-shirts did so well in comparison to the other T-shirts that were like nationally sold based on, The Simpsons or Batman. Those were kind of the big things at the time in the early 90s. My T-shirts were outselling those T-shirts consistently on a local basis. So I found that business fascinating. That's what led me to being involved with the Onion. Those guys approached me and I helped them start it up. And then after a year of the Onion newspaper distributing like 15,000 copies on the campus of Madison, Wisconsin, they sold it to me and two other people. And I became owner, editor in chief, for the next 15 years or so, and built a staff. And we started selling funny T-shirts at the Onion, and other ancillary products. And we built it into a business that didn't really become well known until about the late 90s. And now it's hard to find people who don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Because it's been around for so long. That's kind of the value in the newspaper business is longevity. So the longer you can be in print, generally the more valuable it is, the more people know your name. And that really came about through just a lot of, lean years, suffering through not making barely any more money than it cost to print the paper. So it was just this dogged pursuit of longevity that that allowed the Onion to succeed ultimately.
Yeah, and that finally paid off, of course.
Yeah, no, it did great, and the tortoise always does win that race.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot in there that you just said, but I'd really like to kind of start and go back to what you were talking about with the comic strip you started and the T-shirt and how that developed into the T-shirt. So take us back. How old are you when you started doing this comic strip and stuff like that?
I'm like 23.
Okay.
And sort of a college dropout, and had been trying to come up with a comic strip that I could, make a living drawing for several years at that point, and finally came up with this idea that was a stick figure character named Jim, who basically told you what he did every day in the comic strip. It was like every day was his journal, and it was very simply drawn, very minimalist, and the jokes were very minimal. I was not a big fan of comic strips, so I wanted to do a comic strip that kind of made fun of other comic strips and how banal they were, and kind of subvert the genre, but also deliver on what people need and want from that genre. And it became a big hit, and that's what led to the books and the T-shirts and so on and so forth. And the strip is still around. You can still get the books, the book collections on Amazon. Andrews and McMeel started publishing them. They're like the biggest publisher of comic strip collections. And one of the colleges where the strip ran in Maryland, there was a cartoonist there who had a comic strip. He was a college student, and his strip ran in his local college newspaper right under mine. Jim's Journal was the name of my comic. And he was greatly inspired by my comic to create his own stick figure character who tells you what he does every day. And it was called Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So that's kind of the heir to what I started.
Yeah.
They're very similar. If you look at my strip and his, they're very similar. And he was smart to target kids, like middle grade kids. That was just a huge untapped audience.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. I'm getting strange pop-up ads while I'm trying to talk to you. That ain't right.
Okay. It's not my fault, I promise.
I'm sure it isn't. But I've lost you. I mean, I can still talk to you even though I can't see you. But it's just very strange. I don't know where you went.
We can see and hear you fine, so that's
Yeah,
good.
as long as you can see me. Yeah, you're literally not open on my computer anymore. So don't show me any visual aids. There you are. I got you back.
You got me.
That was very strange. I don't know what happened there.
Okay. No problem. No problem. Wow. So you've had a big influence, because we're going back so many years. You've had such a big influence on different, not only with The Onion, but obviously with this comic strip, which I guess very few people really know about or would be able to trace it back to you.
It was a very small kind of cult success at the time. And yeah.
And so would you just thinking back to my, when I was, I think 12 years old or something, I think I bought the first comic thing I bought, which was Gary Larson's Far Side. And it was, I think it was called The Prehistory of the Far Side. And it was like an anthology collection, big book. I think it cost me about 30 quid here. And I remember going to,
literally, it's right. Can you see it right here?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's the whole complete collection.
Complete collection. Yeah. Well, I bought that. I remember my dad taking me to the bookshop, and it was like 30 quid. It was like all the money I had in the world. But I was like, yeah, I'm sure I want this, Dad. This is it. And he had it's like a chapter or two when he talks you through his whole process of how he became a cartoonist and how he quit his job and how he went through the whole process. And I was just reading this at 12 thinking, this is me, this is what I'm going to do. I never did. I was never really into cartoons, or could never really make that work. So I mean, it strikes me as such a difficult thing to get off the ground, a comic strip. And especially, you said you got it in newspapers or you got it syndicated. I mean, could you give us a potted history of that process? I mean, how was it just literally putting it out there and applying and trying to get people to pay attention? Or
it's just a ton of rejection. It's like, and this is before the internet, but I found a couple of books actually, that sort of taught you how to make comic strips, how to get syndicated with them. And it was all just a matter of, keep trying, keep sending them in. And one of the books I bought listed all the weekly newspapers in the country and all the syndicates and all the daily newspapers. So, I mean, I was just unstoppably dogged, and I just sent submissions to all these people. And I tried different comic strips. When I would try a comic strip and I would get rejected by everybody, I would just try a new one and I would send it out again. And one of the books I got was by this guy, Ken Muse, who gave the best advice in the world. His advice was, when you get a rejection letter, get excited, because that means they saw your work. And frame them, put them up on your wall, because he knew the mindset was going to kill you if you kept getting rejected and you eventually thought, well, I guess I'm no good because people keep rejecting me. No, the process is you have to keep going even though you're getting rejected. Learn from, the mistakes, like why did they reject it? What would work, and try something new. And I mean, that's the magic formula for success in almost anything. And so I just kept doing it, and I kept lowering my sights. The paper that I eventually got my Jim's Journal comic strip in was a college newspaper, which has a much lower barrier to entry. You go to the office, you meet the people, and they didn't like it. They were like, it's minimal, it's stick figures, but we'll try it. We'll try it, for a few weeks, see how it does, like every other day. And because I had done so many other comic strips before then, I clearly had learned something, because it worked, like it caught on. And so they started running it daily and paying me. And from there, they were like a big newspaper. They were one of the biggest college newspapers, the Daily Cardinal in Madison. Okay. So I could send it to other college newspapers and say, hey, it's a big hit at the University of Madison. Yeah. Which everybody kind of knew was one of the bigger college newspapers in America. So yeah, it's just a lot of drudgery and legwork and, just pounding the pavement.
Yeah. So once your comic's there, once it's syndicated and it's starting to get views and stuff, how long are we talking before you start doing the T-shirt thing off the back of that?
It was pretty quick. It was like within the first year or two, I started doing T-shirts.
Okay. Yeah. And what kind of T-shirts? I mean, were you taking, little jokes from the script and just
little catchphrases from the strip.
Okay.
So the character was very minimal. He was very existential, and he never really had strong opinions about anything. So it would just be like the character, and it would say, "I took out the trash today," or "I had a pretty good day. I didn't do anything today." Like just really banal thing. They sold like hotcakes. And so the thing about T-shirts, and I know you know this about the T-shirt business, is that it sometimes can be shocking what T-shirts work and what T-shirts sell. It's a very strange medium. The medium, it's the street art medium is where T-shirts belong. It's kind of a subset. And when somebody is wearing the joke and other people see the joke as they pass them or, see it on them, that's just a very different delivery mechanism than any other medium, certainly like different than performance, different than writing. And so, there are probably some people who understand that medium a little bit after doing it long enough. I started to get a feel for it. I started to get a feel for how people look. I would go into the T-shirt shop and watch people shop for T-shirts. And it was very eye-opening for me because they would always do the same thing. They would always do this thing where like, oh yeah, my Aunt Margie is just like that. She'd love this shirt, and so much of it is like that. Like they don't necessarily think it's funny as the reference of it. Can they relate to it? Do they know someone who's like that or can relate to that or whatever? It's very rarely about, does it look good? Does it represent them?
Yeah.
But there are some T-shirts that are like that. When we started selling Onion T-shirts, people thought the Onion was cool, so they would want just the Onion logo on a T-shirt. But the T-shirts that had a little Onion logo, but a joke, like "I am dumb" was one of the Onion T-shirts. That sold better than the logo shirts, And in my opinion, I look at that, I'm like, I would never wear that. That's a stupid shirt. I just want the cool logo. It's just understated. It's classy. That's not how people buy T-shirts, No, so it's a really, I'm sure it's a weird medium.
Yeah, no, you put your finger on it. I think exactly. It's a medium unlike almost anything else. And obviously there's overlaps with comedy and
of course,
there's overlaps obviously with art and design and stuff like that. But it's such an immediate medium and so personal because it's something you're wearing. It's even different.
It represents
from like on the street. Yeah, exactly. It represents you in a way that the other mediums don't. So it is a medium all to itself, and it's certainly a I love the medium. I love the art form of the T-shirt. I love T-shirts because they're T-shirts, and designs that really look well.
And it's great fun to come up with a T-shirt that does work and that people like and that sells like this. There's very little that's more gratifying than that because it often does feel like a crapshoot, and you just never know what's going to hit.
Yeah, and I think the thing you said there about the Onion logo versus the joke and that kind of thing, I think that's that's something I've noticed over time. Something I tell people, even if you do have a brand, if you have a following and people are buying it because they like you, because they like the Onion or something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just stick with my logo on a shirt or my name on a shirt. If you can do something that's somehow a joke related to your brand or something that they would get because they're part of that.
Yeah, some kind of in joke that makes people ask, what's that about? Those are good T-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, so going back to your comic strip T-shirts and the relationship there, was it, I'm assuming people didn't really need to know your comic strip in order to find these T-shirts funny. They were universal in their appeal, really.
Certainly a lot of fans of the comic did buy the T-shirts, but they worked regardless.
Right.
Yeah, people who didn't know the strip would buy them and wear them.
Yeah, I think there's a huge lesson there, isn't there? That you obviously hit a sweet spot where you had your own thing, if you like, your own brand, your own IP that you were building up as well. But you had this wonderful overlap where you could sell things related to that IP that were using that IP to people who didn't even know the IP. So that's obviously a great position to be in.
Yeah, it was a early lesson for me in running a creative business to be firing on different cylinders, to have a comic strip, to have books, to have T-shirts. Anybody who wants to make a living in the comedy business can't just do one thing. You can't just go and do stand-up. You have to have a CD, you have to have a book, you have to be doing videos on YouTube. It's critical to build your brand and to, especially now, like the field is so glutted. in order to get noticed. Like you have to be everywhere that someone might find you,
Yeah.
You have to be on all the social media platforms,
Yeah, you have to try a lot of things. You have to put a lot of things out there, and like you say, you had to pound the pavements and keep submitting this comic so
exactly.
you can get off the ground.
And you never know which avenue is going to be a big hit for you,
Exactly.
And then if one avenue collapses, like during COVID when in-person performing collapsed, the people who had those other streams were doing fine. The people who were doing videos or writing books or writing articles and making money doing that could survive the hit of not getting the performing gigs anymore,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's true, it's true for creatives of all types, but whether you're a comedy writer or a designer, if you've got different streams of income, that's the sweet spot. You want to be able to, something can go down, your bestseller can drop off, but you've got something else that can pick up the slack. So yeah. Okay, let's switch lanes a little bit and talk about kind of the theory of comedy and stuff like that. This is what I'm quite interested in, and like I said, this is what led me to you in the first place. And your book, How to Write Funny, which I've got a copy of here, pretty well worn over the past couple of years. And I think I found in your book a lot of the kind of stuff that I do. So you've given people like practical methods for taking what you call a subtext and then running it through these filters and trying different things out. And it's quite similar to the approach I've developed and taught people for coming up with T-shirt designs. But why don't you could you give us kind of a broad overview of that approach and the theory of comedy as you see it?
Yeah, so it is really simple. And what I tried to do was I tried to articulate the path that an idea takes in your brain before it comes out as a joke when you're a professional comedy writer. And for a seasoned professional, that's going to feel very instinctive and it's just going to happen. But for somebody starting out wanting to learn comedy, it has to be deconstructed and has to be explained step by step. So that's what this book is. It's step-by-step explanation of that process. So the way the comedy brain works is it thinks of or observes some sort of opinion or value judgment about the world around you. And then it worms its way through your brain through one of 11 different filters. I call them funny filters, that are literary devices that turn an ordinary, unfunny idea into a funny joke. And so, some examples. Irony is a really basic funny filter that takes the opposite of the opinion and states it with a straight face. So oftentimes that just by itself can be funny and it can be a joke. And irony is one of the tools that professional comedians use. And every comedian comedy writer is different. They're going to favor certain funny filters over others. Anthony Jeselnik is a popular stand-up comic who uses the misplaced focus funny filter a lot, where he'll lead you down one path. You think he's going to do one thing, but then he switches it on you and gives you something totally unexpected. He also uses the shock funny filter, which is any reference to violence, sex, drugs, anything like risque or shocking. And it can be a mild reference, but any little bit of that adds to the humor value. So when you start piling funny filters on top of each other, you get potentially a more accessible joke. So there's this one headline that we had in The Onion. We used to have in the paper edition, we'd have these, what we'd call skyboxes. They're at the top of the paper. There was a picture and a headline, and it would say, see page 8, but then there would be nothing on page 8. And so on the website now, those are just, I don't know what they call them, but it's like, there's no story with it. It's just a picture and a headline. And we did one, and Todd Hansen, who was our head writer, came up with this headline. It's a picture of a cute kitten, and the headline was, "Kitten thinks of nothing but murder all day." And we put that on a T-shirt. And it was one of our best-selling headline T-shirts, because we put a lot of different headlines on T-shirts. And the reason is, and I analyzed it, that one simple joke used all 11 of the funny filters. Every single one, like just the ones we've talked about. Irony. You expect a cute kitten to be innocent. No, it's the opposite. It's thinking of murder. That's irony. Shock. It mentions murder. Misplaced focus. You think a kitten's going to do one thing, it does another thing. So that's like a mix of irony and misplaced focus. And he uses all the 11 as well. So, and it even uses meta humor, which is one of the more complicated funny filters because it's humor that makes fun of other humor. It uses that too because cat jokes or like the hang in there poster is a common trope of comedy, using a cute kitten with a funny slogan. This turns that on its head and kind of makes fun of it, subverts it. So it's a very complex joke, but it worked. Like it was so effective, and that's what the funny filters do for you. Like you can use one or two funny filters and you might appeal to people who really favor those particular funny filters. But the more you can use, the more people you're going to reach with that joke. So that's kind of the holy grail when you can come up with a joke that uses them all. And people can overthink this stuff and they can come up with a joke that's too long and too complicated that nobody gets. And that's a common problem. You have to keep it simple. And along with this simple process of subtext filtered through the funny filters joke, there are many tips that I offer in the book. And one of them is keep it simple. Don't overthink it, because that's the mistake most people make.
Yeah. So I don't know what your process looks like these days for writing, jokes, and if you're sitting down to brainstorm and come up with stuff, do you kind of manually force yourself to work through the filters, or do you kind of, throw stuff out there and then you kind of work backwards and look and think, oh, that's kind of this, and let me try and hook it up with this? Or what does your process look like?
Yeah, I do all of the above. So I don't have to come up with jokes anymore, but it's still something I enjoy. And sometimes I'll tweet out a joke or whatever. And I'll go through phases where I'll write 10 jokes a day or 10 funny ideas a day, just to generate concepts, ideas for books, ideas for other projects or whatever. And yeah, I'll do all of the above. Sometimes I'll just sit and do stream of consciousness, 10 ideas, and they're all terrible. Maybe one or two have some potential. And other times I'll go through the funny filter and use those as tools to try to change an opinion that I have into some. That's usually what will happen if something happened in the news, something big happened, and I want to tweet about it. I'll go through the funny filters and see if I can come up with a way to make my opinion funny. So yeah, it's all of the above. But and one of my other tips is that quantity is the key to quality. Anybody who writes comedy, and I'm sure you know this from the t-shirt business, the more ideas you come up with, the better your chances of finding a gem in the rough that really works. If you just come up with 2 t-shirt ideas, you're not going to succeed. If you come up with 100 and pick the best 2, you're going to do great.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, something we talk about a lot is, I think it was Linus Pauling said the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. So, anything that helps you come up with a lot, and obviously the funny filters are one example of a tool that can help you take one subtext, take one topic or whatever, and spin it out into however many different ideas.
Right.
So yeah, that's great. What about one other thing that interests me is kind of there's the process side, but then there's you're coming up with ideas, or maybe not so much these days, but back in the day when you were having to churn out ideas, when you had a business to run and it relied on funny content coming regularly all the time. Do you have a kind of system for saving stuff? Do you have a system for organizing ideas and for a database of ideas, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I still have that. I had that at the Onion. We had a thing called the Big Ass Issue Content List, which had hundreds of headlines that when we had a slow week and we weren't really coming up with anything, we could dig into the archive and see what other headlines we had in the pile that had aged well for whatever reason. And for myself now, when I do these 10 ideas every day, I go through them later and segment them into different categories and store them in different places. Ideas for books go one place, ideas for jokes go other places, ideas for a movie or a project or anything random would go in a different place. And then over time, like if I get into a space where, like right now I'm writing a lot of books, so I'll go in the book folder and look at all my ideas for books. Is that a good idea I'd want to write a book about? Yeah. And it's great when you can file an idea away and forget about it and then see it fresh. Like you didn't even come up with it. It's just in this pile. And it strikes you as really appealing. That's great. Like that's my favorite type of idea to pursue. Then I can really commit to it because it came from my head, but I also reacted to it really positively as an audience. So there's probably a good chance that other people will react positively to it as well. So that's my favorite outcome of that process.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, I've seen the same. Like I save a lot of ideas in Evernote, and I've been doing that for years. So one of my favorite things to do, if trying to pull myself off Instagram or Twitter and just go and flick back through Evernote and just like, flick that thing all the way down to like 2 years ago and just see what's there. And it'll just be like,
Right.
pirate dinosaurs or something like that, and I'll just be like, oh, what, that was a great idea. And then some of it's complete nonsense that I can't even figure out what I was thinking. But yeah, it's such a great experience to be like, oh, that's a funny idea, or I remember where that came from, and then to pick it up again.
Yep. No, it's great.
It's great. Yeah. One of the things you talk about in the book, because you do talk about like wordplay and puns and stuff like that. And in particular, you make, I can't find you've got a diagram about puns and how that puns make up like the tiniest part, jokes that are funny is this, jokes that contain puns are this, but puns that are funny is like this small percentage of it. So what is it you hate about puns? Because, personally, they do quite well on T-shirts. Is it just that they don't really translate well to other, joke formats and things like that?
Yeah, it's not that I don't think puns are funny. I think a good pun is great and it works well. But the problem is most people use puns wrong, and they use them in a way that doesn't communicate any interesting subtext, or they'll use them in a way that, so it's a word that has two meanings, and it's put in a context where one of the two meanings is revealed or whatever, or it's a funny dichotomy that the two meanings are together. And a pun works best so you can usually read the joke in two ways for each meaning of the pun. It works best when reading it both ways works. A lot of puns are used where it only works if you read it one way. You recognize the pun, but it doesn't work if you read it with one of the meanings and not the other. So that's a mistake. And then the other mistake people make with puns is they don't have good subtext. So if you have good subtext and the pun reads both ways correctly, like it makes sense if you read it both ways, that's a great pun and it works well. It's just that you rarely see that. It's very uncommon. So Onion headlines do that a lot, where they'll use a pun and it'll work both ways and there's good subtext. Like the Onion has a really strict, it's kind of an unspoken rule. Like they would never just do a pun that read only one way, and they would never do a pun that didn't have good subtext. Like that would be totally worthless. So the Onion is a good place to find that. So like one example of an Onion headline pun that I like is trophy wife mounted. There's two different puns in there and they both work both ways. So it literally works four ways, and it has good subtext because it's saying something about what's wrong with humanity. That, we have this, it's very complex. We have this whole dichotomy about, men get older and want a younger wife, and rich men want a trophy wife and stuff like that. So, through the pun, it diminishes that viewpoint and equates the trophy wife with just some trophy that you would set on a mantle. So very complicated joke, 3-word joke. Really complex, really clever, really funny. I didn't write it, but that's a good example of a pun.
That's a great example. And like you say, just 3 words, packed with all that meaning inside just a 3-word, sentence is incredible. But I think that's definitely that's great advice, on the lookout for puns, because I teach people, various different ways to come up with puns. Obviously, there's different types of puns. There's puns where it's based on the double meaning. There's times where it's based on, a sound within the word and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
And a lot of designers, I see a lot of designs where designers are doing a pun, and it's it'll be something, a pun based on the word. It'll be a kind of double meaning thing. But like you say, what they're missing is often a subtext or anything like that. So what they have is a word, just one word and a picture, and and it could be a funny, be an animal picture or something like that. It'd be like hedgehogs or some kind of joke like that, which is fine and great. And they, I'm not saying those don't do well on T-shirts. That hedgehogs example is a very big seller on t-shirts.
That's fine.
But if you just have that, you're not opening yourself up to all these opportunities of, subtext and stuff like that, and you're really making people, they can either like it or they don't. You don't give them options because it's just like one simple pun. So I think, you're absolutely right. If you can get a subtext in there, if you can make a double meaning, and if it can be, something relevant or culturally relevant or on trend with a topic or a subject that's happening right now, then that's where, puns can really hit the sweet spot, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Current events are a great reference that always help.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you're not a t-shirt designer, these days. You do have experience in it. You know what it takes to, make funny ideas, and you know what connects with people on that level. And I know what you do a lot of these days is you help, you train people in comedy, you teach comedy writers and stuff like that. What are the kind of people that you're helping? What careers do they want to go into? And could you kind of break it down? Because I'm kind of interested in this. For example, do these people all want to write, scripts for TV and work in movies and stuff, or are they people who want to be stand-up comics? How does it kind of break down with the people you're teaching these days?
It really runs the gamut, like anything you can imagine. There are t-shirt people, there are like copywriters who do advertising, there are stand-up comedians, there are people who want to write books, write comedy articles or short pieces, short stories. There are people who speak, on a number of different topics and just want their lectures to be funnier. Magicians, hypnotists, people who perform and want to make their performance funnier, but who aren't necessarily strictly in the comedy genre. But I would say the majority are either stand-up comics or people who want to write short humor. Those are probably the big ones.
Hmm. So from where you're sitting these days, and obviously with the experience you've got, I mean, let's say someone's watching this, they think they've got kind of the funny bone. Maybe they're not a designer, but they're interested in, writing comedy and coming up with jokes, and they think they've got what it takes. Maybe they're a bit like me in that they watch comedy programs on TV and think, I could do better than that. Who are the writers for this thing? This stinks. What kind of advice and what kind of route would you recommend that someone like that takes? Would you recommend that they, for example, throw themselves into Twitter and try and build a following being funny, on Twitter or something like that? Or do you see things from your perspective that are kind of untapped opportunities for talented writers and funny people right now?
It's a great question. Basically, I recommend doing anything and everything because, like we were saying before, you never know what's going to hit. And the people who succeed are the people who are so passionate about it that they're everywhere. And so when one thing hits, they're prepared for that hit because they're there. So when I was starting out, there was no internet. There were basically the standard media. There was print, there was performance, there was audio, there was visual, and so I did it all. I did all that stuff. And that worked for me. I hit it with comic strips. I haven't mentioned this at all, but I also started doing funny voices for commercials and cartoons. I started doing that really early before The Onion and made a good living doing that. So now if I'm 18 or whatever and I'm starting out, I'm on all the social media. Anytime there's a new social media, I'm going to be the first one in that. So as The Onion was coming up, we did that. We were the first everywhere. We were the first to do a podcast. We were the first to put video online. Like anytime there was a new thing that was totally untested and just a new way to disseminate our material, we'd jump in it. Social media was the one thing we were slow to be on because social media is so interactive. And the whole joke of The Onion was that it was not interactive. It was this engine of truth that was just telling you what was real and you had to believe it. We're making fun of, big heartless media company in their ivory tower or whatever. But once we did, we're everywhere. We start a YouTube channel. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook, and that's really valuable because once Facebook takes over the world and people don't go to websites anymore, like we have a presence on Facebook, so we can still drive traffic. So it really all comes down to being everywhere. And the best way to be motivated to put yourself everywhere is sheer love of doing it and sheer passion. So it's those are the people who succeed because they're going to keep doing it even when they suck because they love it so much. So they're going to take feedback and they're going to improve as they go along. And eventually those are the people that do well. So for t-shirts, I would recommend coming up with a bunch of t-shirt ideas, sending them in, sending them into people like you, companies that do funny t-shirts, and look at their submissions, see what they want to see, and just start giving them stuff. Because obviously that's the commodity, it's the creative that's the commodity. So most people aren't willing to put in the time to do the 10, 20 ideas a day that it takes to generate the kind of material that are going to make you come off as a prolific creator that someone would trust as a source for potentially buying one or two ideas, out of every 3 lists of 20, which is going to be a pretty decent hit rate if that's what you're going for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's great advice. And I mean, these days, t-shirt designers, we have so many opportunities. We have places we can just upload our artwork and, hope for the best. Fingers crossed, it might sell, it might not. And then, but the kind of place I got started was, like you say, you're submitting stuff to these places and you get rejections. You get a no, thank you. You don't get any reason why. You just get, no, we don't like that design. But that in the early days, it did give me that, that thicker skin to keep going and be like, okay, they didn't like that one. Let me try this one. Or they didn't like that one on that site. Let me try it over with these guys. And I mean, a few months in, you got one design selected out of 40 or 50. Well, at least you've got one and you got something to go off then. And then you can kind of like, okay, what is it about that design that really hits? Because now I've got some data to go off.
Right. It can't be overstated just how powerful that getting over rejection can be, because so many people are going to get either one or just a critical mass of rejections, and they're going to start to believe that they're no good, and they stop. And that's just so wrong-headed. Like that literally is the completely wrong way to do it. And it's a recipe for literally never succeeding at it. That rejection is a learning experience. And anyone who's really passionate about it, really loves it, is going to take every rejection like you did and say, oh, they didn't like that. Let me try something else that maybe they'll like. But it's so natural for us to take that rejection personally. Like, oh, they didn't like me. I'm bad. I can't do this. And that's just crippling. And it cripples a lot of people who could be great. If they had just kept it up, they might have been great.
Yeah. That's it. That's so true. I want to bring in some questions here in a second, but just before I do, I just had one other thing that came to mind, and that's for people who are maybe, we talked about, get yourself on every platform, get out there and be everywhere. What about those who are maybe the introverts among us? So, maybe they've got a skill set, they can write funny, they can come up with funny content, but they're very much, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to do stand-up. I don't want to be on TikTok doing silly dances. Is there a route for people like that? And, is that just that they have to do the more behind the scenes stuff? They have to submit to places? Do you see a path for them on Twitter or on, writing a blog or stuff like that? Is that still a route for people like that?
It is possible to succeed when you cut off certain routes because you think you're too shy for it, or you don't think you have any aptitude for it, or whatever. But the real recipe for success is to just think of that as, okay, this is your job, and you don't like the dishwashing part of your job, but you have to do it anyway. Woody Allen didn't want to perform. His agents forced him to go on stage. He was cripplingly shy, hated every minute of it. But eventually he got good at it. And that's what happens with every skill. Some of the best stand-up comics and performers are people who were cripplingly shy. Steve Martin is another example, who forced themselves to keep doing it and keep learning. So you're shooting yourself in the foot, and you're using it as an excuse by saying, oh, I'm an introvert. I don't want to be on stage. That's absolutely a self-sabotaging excuse. Get your ass on stage, toughen up, suffer through it and do it. So I'm more introverted than anyone else I know. I'm literally I'm practically a recluse. I told you earlier, I rarely leave my house. So I go out and I'm on the lecture circuit and I give talks and I tell jokes and I perform. Did that come easy to me? Did I leap right into that? Of course not. It was a very painful, agonizing process to get good at that, get good enough at it that people will pay me to do it. And you need to, like, it's one of the jobs of comedy. Even if you just want to write, if you have a #1 best-selling book, they're not going to have you on the Colbert Show to talk about your book if you don't have any performing experience. The people who succeed are the people who also take improv classes and do stand-up, so that when they have an opportunity to go, let's say it's not even Colbert, let's say it's CNN, and they just want you to come and talk about your new book that's a big hit. How does it benefit you having no experience being on camera? No, you need to be at the top of your game. You need to be really comfortable on camera. You need to be funny and engaging and exude that same humor vibe that came out of your other work, so that people see that it all dovetails into this brand of you that they want to see more of. So huge mistake to say that, oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm too shy. Like that's the weak person's excuse to get out of doing the work necessary to succeed.
Yeah, that's true. It's tough talk, but it's true.
Yeah, no, and like I said, it's possible. Like you could succeed without that. You know, there are some people who don't go on stage and succeed, but they are the tiny minority and the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and I was just thinking as well, so much of success, whatever business you're in, is being able to relate to people and talk to people and be in social situations and make those connections. And we've all got stories, I'm sure, of stuff like that. So
so for me, big introvert, if I have to go do a speech and I have to interact with people after, I do it, but then I collapse for like the next 48 hours and recover, because I'm not an extrovert who feeds off of that. But it's part of the job. It's part of being a comedy brand. And so I do it,
It's great advice. Right, we got about 10 minutes here, so I'm going to just switch over and bring in some questions from the people in the comments. So if you've got a question, I'm going to scroll back up and take a few that came in. But if you've got any questions for Scott, please go ahead and stick them in the comments right now. We got about 10 minutes before we need to wrap this up. So I'm going to have a scroll through. Lots of love from The Onion. I've loved The Onion since it was a paper. How do you keep writing satire that stands out now that real life is so bizarre that it rivals anything you can think of? That's from Kathleen.
Yeah, good question, Kathleen. You'd be surprised at how bizarre real life has always been. Like, we tend to think that, oh, things are so crazy now. No, things have always been crazy. Like, think back to any point in human history. Was there crazy stuff happening? Were there crazy, maniacal people killing millions? Of course. It's always crazy. So as soon as you start thinking, oh, it's too crazy to parody, that might just be another self-sabotaging excuse for not writing jokes. No, everything, humans are always funny, no matter what they're doing. So, and to answer your other question, the trick to writing satire that stands out is what I said earlier, that quantity is the key to quality. So at The Onion, the system that The Onion's been using for 30 odd years now is the writers write hundreds of headlines and then we pick the best ones. So that's really the simple answer to that question. Then it comes down to, well, how are you selecting it? Well, the editor selects it, but then he gets feedback from the team, and you pick one that feels different, that you haven't done before, that's different than the competition, while maintaining the Onion voice,
Yeah, that's great. I was just working on a design today, and it's a design with like a few different kind of mini jokes on it, and I was just kind of spitting it out really quickly. I just didn't think it was great, so I just sent it over to my, my staff, my sister and my mom and my family and a friend, and just said, can you improve this. I don't think these jokes are really hitting. So yeah, obviously it's that process of filtering down a lot of that. It really helps if you've got people you can bounce ideas off and sharpen things up. And I think of the Simpsons writing team, and how many, I think there's been like 130 different Simpsons writers over the years.
Sounds about right.
And the principle that they would get 12 or 15 people around a desk, and if a joke wasn't approved by every single person on the desk, it didn't make it in the cut on the show. And I think that's a great example of, imagine how many jokes they must have had, to filter those down for one single episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah. And that's a different system than we would use at The Onion.
Mm.
And it works for The Simpsons, but they are, they've had some seasons that aren't as funny as other seasons.
Mm.
And the way it works at The Onion is there's an editor who's like the leader, who has veto power over the group. And if 10 people like it, but one person doesn't, and the editor thinks it's really funny, it goes in. Because if you get unanimous consent, then it's almost like writing by committee, which weakens the joke. So at The Onion, it's all about a strong central vision. And that's usually, in my opinion, that's a way to keep quality more consistent than the committee approach.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I just noticed today as well, I don't know whether you saw this, that the South Park had just been commissioned for up to season 30, I think, and it's a $900 million deal or something for the writers there. Just, I thought interesting that we're having a conversation about comedy on a day when, comedy is such big, or humor, it's such big business, isn't it? You
really
think about what that's worth to whoever that is, Paramount Pictures or whoever's producing it. It's such a huge business. So,
and again, with them, it's about the brand. They've put in the hours to build this thing that's been around, as long as The Onion or The Simpsons. I guess a little less long, but that's where that leads. That longevity is everything, and those guys do amazing work, and they're so prolific. Super impressed with the Trey Parker.
They are incredible. And Holloway says, Scott, I'm looking at your books now. Which do you recommend we start with in today's market?
Well, thanks for asking. My first book in the How to Write Funny series is just called How to Write Funny, and that's the basic intro to comedy writing for the complete novice. You've got it right there, Michael. And that's what I'd recommend getting started with. Even if you're more experienced and you've done some professional work, mastery comes from repetition of the fundamentals. So it never hurts to brush up on the fundamentals. So if you're a rank beginner who's never done anything, or if you're really experienced, you're going to get a lot from that book that I think will improve or enhance your or jumpstart your creativity.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's great to have a practical, book that you can actually look through and sparks ideas. And obviously, coming from a T-shirt design perspective and doing that for years, I'm pretty familiar with most of the T-shirt tropes and things like that. But it's great to have, another angle to look at that gives you a perspective that you hadn't thought about. And that's what, that's why I found this book so valuable. Haven't yet picked up your, I know you've done a couple of sequels to it. Haven't yet picked those up, but I'm sure those are just as valuable as well.
Well, the second book, How to Write Funnier, is about how to extrapolate a simple. So the first book is about how to write a joke, basically. The second book is about how to expand that into a longer bit or sketch or article. And then the third book is kind of what we were talking about a moment ago, how to use a group to make your work even funnier, how to get feedback and how to build a team. And then the newest book is How to Write Funny Characters, which is really just an expansion on the one funny filter mentioned in the first book, the character funny filter, which is a funny filter that I devoted about 2 or 3 pages to in the first book. But everybody asked me like, oh my God, how does that one work again? Like, what are these character archetypes you're talking about that always work with audiences? And so it took a whole other book just to expand on that one funny filter and explain how powerful the character funny filter is, especially in performance, TV, movies, etc.
Yeah. Kathleen says she still has her inspirational poster kit and falls to death after 17 years. Ripped it out of a 365-day calendar decades ago. It's perfect.
I remember that one. Yeah, that was good. That was a fun one.
Yeah, that's good. Wendy says, "Do you think there is a real difference between UK and USA humor?" I don't know if you have a perspective
Yeah,
on
there's a
that.
lot of extra U's in the UK humor.
Okay.
That's about it. I think the humor that I try to encourage people to write is as accessible as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So if it works for humans everywhere who can understand the language you're using, you're doing it right. Because we're all human beings, regardless of what country we come from. We all have the same foibles. And if you're using humor that's too based on, let's say, current events in a certain area, you're going to limit your audience. So there definitely is some humor that's different. And there are certain characteristics. Like in the UK, historically, they've used more madcap. That's one of the funny filters. It's like broad physical humor. They've been more comfortable with that, whereas Americans have been a little more buttoned up, and they're going to use more like irony, misplaced focus, stuff like that. But you know, there are pockets of people everywhere who know how to do accessible humor and use all the funny filters. And so among the top humorists, I don't see much of a difference because they're just appealing to very universal human themes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think there are cultural differences, but especially these days, our cultures, UK and USA, there's not that much difference between them. You know, we're usually talking about the same kind of topics at the same kind of times. So yeah, there's not huge differences. You obviously could go back and talk about, you know, Monty Python versus whatever was on USA comedy shows at that kind of time. And I've certainly had the experience of trying to explain to an American why this particular sketch is so hilarious and it's just going over their heads. But a lot of that comes down to, you know, it's just kind of local things. You know, if you don't, you know, I'm sure this happens if you're from a certain state, then you will find certain things funny because you're familiar with certain tropes within that state or whatever it is.
That can happen. And, you know, Monty Python, they were the Beatles of comedy. You know, they came here and really revolutionized humor here. They influenced SNL and the Lampoon and so many other things. So, and I'm talking about the Lampoon, you know, radio hour and
right.
So forth. You know, there's a lot of cross pollination. I know that The Onion was a big hit in the UK when they discovered it, and I think now there are more like news parody type things happening in the UK, but there were some before The Onion too. So
yeah, I think I mean, The Onion started a whole genre, didn't it? You know, it really popularized that satirical newspaper thing, and I can think off the top of my head of a few, you know, UK ones that were birthed out of that, you know, same process. So yeah, it's had a huge influence, hasn't it, on well, pop culture in general, I suppose. Zillist asking for a friend, do you think it's even possible to achieve mega success without being in the Illuminati?
Yes. So the Illuminati will not let you in the club. So if you try to apply for entrance in the club, for example, if you try to get a job being the host of a late night talk show, you're going to get rejected for that. But we still live in a meritocracy in Western culture. If you do it yourself and break through, there are so many more ways to do that now through social media and so forth, that once you achieve a certain level, you're part of the Illuminati, whether they want you to be or not. So I come from a poor family in rural Wisconsin, never been in the Illuminati, don't know anyone in it. But I'm part of it now because of The Onion, because The Onion has achieved this. But The Onion came about not because anyone ever gave us permission to do it. No one in the Illuminati ever funded us or helped us. And we weren't in New York or Los Angeles or anything like that. We were in Wisconsin, of all the godforsaken places. But through sheer, you know, grinding hard work, we achieved a certain level of success. And I see that with a lot of people, especially in the comedy business. I think that's a great power that you have now. That it was harder when I was young to get there because there were fewer media and there were fewer ways to succeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, the thing also about mega success is it does take a certain mindset to be able to withstand that. like Chris Farley was not in the Illuminati. He was a kid from Wisconsin also. And once he got to be at that level, it killed him. You know, it was too much for him. And that does happen. John Belushi is another example.
Yeah.
You know, to achieve mega success and be able to manage that and to kind of know how to live with that kind of success, that's something I go into in I have a course, Comedy Business School, that talks about how to succeed in comedy. A part of it is how to start to develop that mindset, so that, because it can really mess with your head when you're lauded by the Illuminati and you're making a ton of money and people know your work all over the world. That really can mess with your head. You start to either wonder if you're worth it, or you start to believe that you're worth it. And either one of those two extremes can make you go nuts. And you have to be really centered, and you have to have a really level head, and you have to be very business minded and think of it as a business and kind of separate your emotions from it in order to do well with it.
No, that's great advice. You mentioned there about your courses. So why don't you just tell us, I've got a couple of slides here just about the courses that you've got on offer, and people can find these at michaelessek.com/Scott, of course, but you've got How to Write Funny and Comedy Business School. So what's the difference between those courses? Could you tell us a little bit about each one?
Sure, yeah. So How to Write Funny is a course that I created based on the book, How to Write Funny, because a lot of people liked the book and found it useful, but they need more. They need personal instruction. They need the Facebook group that comes with it, so they can have peers to check their work and get feedback on their work. So if you're really serious about learning comedy, yeah, you can get the book, but the course is probably going to get you there faster. And if that's your learning style, then that's going to be a much better option for you. Comedy Business School is not about how to write humor. It's about how to succeed at the comedy business. Totally different thing. You don't have to be funny to succeed in the comedy business. You don't even have to know how to write humor. You basically have to know how to navigate that world. And you probably need to know how to interact with other people. Those are totally different skills than actually learning how to construct humor. So that's why those two courses, and that's why they're separate.
That's awesome. Thank you for walking us through that. Like I say, I can definitely recommend the book, and people can obviously go and check out michaelessek.com/Scott, so they can find out more about those courses. I know you've got a lot more information about what's taught in each of them on the sales pages there. Listen, Scott, we've taken a lot of your time here, and you've been very generous in giving. There's a few, there's more than a few people saying thank you, and I was so happy and grateful to learn that Scott would be on today. This is great. Excellent conversation, and other such comments. So thank you so much. Is there anything you'd want to leave us with? Any last minute tip, or anything you'd like people to follow you on, or go and find out more about you?
Yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm on all the social media, Scott Dikkers. You can usually find I show up, which is pretty handy. And hopefully I'll start to see some humor from some of the people that we talked to today. Absolutely.
Well, lots of people saying, great show, great information. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. From me and from everyone watching, thank you for your time today, Scott. For everyone watching, make sure you do check out michaelessek.com/Scott and grab, Scott's courses and dive into his world. I'll be back next week with another live stream. But until then, thank you all for watching. Thank you to Scott. And we'll see you soon. So thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's been a delight.